Hey YouTube, coming back to this drawing now. Yeah, I'm still working on it, still chipping away. I've only been drawing this thing in my spare time between studying and working, and also looking for a bit of work as well, so kind of doing that at the moment. So I've only been chipping away at this drawing in my spare time, which lately I haven't had too much. And I've also been working on another drawing course, which is very, very far away off right now. But it's a course on architecture drawing, so, you know, thinking about drawing the classical columns and things like that. So that's been keeping me very busy. But I thought, I'm still waiting for this video to upload here. It's only at 56% at the moment. It's a massive video file. So I figured I've got some time to scratch away at this piece. And I think it's come a long way since, I don't know when it was, 6 months ago maybe or so. And I last posted a video of this one. So I'm just kind of shading in all the forms now. It's a lot more rendered since the last time you saw it, I think. Got a lot more ground textures going on there. We got some storm clouds in the distance. That was a bit of a last minute design change, which I decided to incorporate. And I thought that would look pretty cool because, you know, obviously it's like the Roman army, which is approaching from the distance. And I thought, you know, putting some storm clouds behind these guys, you know, a little bit symbolic maybe. And I'm really happy with how they turned out. I still need to finish them. They're not finished, but these parts look pretty cool. That one needs a little more refinement. Where's my eraser? Let's maybe put a few highlights in those clouds there. And this part of the cloud is in shadow because the shadow of that cloud is casting a shadow onto this one. That's kind of what I'm trying to do anyway, but I'll refine those a bit later. So where was I? What was I trying to do? I think I was just sketching in these guys' shadows in the distance here. The shadows in the foreground are a little bit more refined, but I didn't really work on the ones in the background, and I had a few more construction lines of the horizon line and the directions where the shadows were traveling to, but after all this rendering, I've kind of lost that construction, so I kind of just have to sketch these in. But I can kind of see the general direction. You can see the shadow of the centurion here. It's kind of, you know, that's the shadow of his head there. His feet are here, so I can see that it's kind of going in that direction. And the horizon line crosses through these guys' faces. So we're kind of like at eye level with these guys on horseback. So I know the horizon line is traveling there. His shadow goes there. Their shadows are, you know, you can see his head is down there. So it's kind of coming that way. So it's sort of around this point. Again, I've lost the entire construction, so I'm really just relying on estimation. But I honestly don't mind that. I don't mind sort of making it up as I go along. I like being technically accurate too, but I think it's nice to just loosen up a little bit. And while you should familiarize yourself with the laws of perspective, that doesn't mean I think you should have to be a slave to it. You know, I think I mean, these I'm looking for his shadow as well, and it would be about parallel with that guy maybe. So I'm just going to sketch it in there. So yeah, I don't think you should be a slave to perspective. Although, you know, the more you know about perspective, the more you can draw. So absolutely, you know, train your knowledge in that subject. But at this point, for this drawing anyway, this is more just conceptual, and I really am focused on just getting the job done at this point, because I started this drawing months ago. I'm just gonna lighten up this guy's face. It's really bothering me. I don't think I like where I put the shadows there. Maybe I'll refine him later. I started this drawing, I think September last year, and I've just been chipping away at it, just slowly. It's a passion project. It's not for any. It's not commission work or anything. This is just for myself. So there's no deadline. So now I'm just thinking, if that part of the shadow is his head there, just traveling that angle, it should all be at the same angle there. So if I hold that angle, then the shadow of his head should be falling about there. So this is all just estimation. And he's got like this sort of, it's only sketched in briefly, but he's wearing like that kind of lion headdress. So really I'm looking for the shadow up here and just comparing it where that should fall. So I think it would fall a little more this way, somewhere thereabouts. So I'm sketching very loosely. I do very tight drawing in the foreground, but then in the background I'm kind of just sketching it loosely and just kind of making it up as I go along. Because I don't think you have to be too accurate for the background. I think sometimes less is more. And I don't want these guys to be hyper detailed, you know. You have to think about the aerial perspective of the image. It's got a really nice thing going on where there's a lot of contrast in the foreground and less contrast in the background. And I'm really just trying to maintain that. So I don't want too much detail or any kind of technical parts of the figures in the background. I just want them to fade into the distance. I've got to draw a shadow of this horse as well. God, that's gonna be a bitch. I'm not gonna figure that out. I'm literally just what I'm doing here, I'm just gonna sketch the general position in and then I'll refine it. It's kind of what I did with these guys in the foreground. Like none of their shadows are, you know, calculated. They're just kind of sketched in generally, and then I refine the silhouettes. I think that's good enough for the kind of work I'm doing. You have to remember that, you know, I mean, I like technical accuracy. You know, when I do architecture drawing, I cast shadows accurately, and I like drawing the plans and elevation views. Like, I like technical drawing. But when it comes to figures, I prefer to just kind of loosen up a little bit. So if his shadow's traveling that way, the horse is kind of in the same direction. So I'm just going to sketch that in there. So the shadow of the head of the horse would be somewhere thereabouts. Again, I'm just generally doing it by eye. And I'm putting it in lightly so that if I need to move it, I can. I don't have to make it too dark because I don't have to commit to anything just yet. Just going to kind of sketch it in briefly. The shadow. I think the shadow of its torso would be maybe here. I'm literally just gonna throw it in there. And just estimate everything. What was I saying before? Yeah, shadows and figures. So it's possible to cast shadows with architectural drawing, which is actually what my new drawing course is about, because it's skiography is the art form, that's what it's called. It's very much possible to do that with architecture, and we did a little bit of that in my perspective drawing course on Gumroad. But when it comes to figures, I kind of let go of technical accuracy, and I'm actually kind of designing the shadow shapes. Like, so when I look at a shadow on a figure, I need to kind of, you know, instead of drawing what's accurate, I kind of ask myself what's going to make it look good, you know? What's going to make it look awesome to look at? So that's kind of my philosophy when it comes to shading in these figures. So I'm kind of putting a shadow around. This is the horse's shadow, which I'm just scribbling in. And I kind of want it to fall around its leg here. The reason I'm doing that is so the horse's leg kind of, well, it just gives it a bit more contrast, and it makes it sort of pop out of the page a little more. So I'm always looking for those contrasts. I'm always looking for where I can put dark shapes next to the light shapes. I'm always looking for those possibilities. Okay. Now that there's a shadow falling over the horse. That's the rider's leg here, which I didn't actually finish drawing, it seems. And I think his knee was positioned somewhere here. So now I'm just trying to think human proportions. Because I think the lower leg is about roughly 2 heads tall. So I'll go there. So his foot would be, oh, no, yeah, I can see where I sketched his feet. That's the bottom of his foot right there. Which, yeah, I think that works. Where is... Just wondering if I can find like a bit of paper that I can rest my hand on. I'll look for it later. Just going to come into that shadow, just darken that a little. I'm going to darken the edge of his leg there, which is like a cylindrical form. Like that. We've got his torso. So rendering from imagination, very tricky. And I try to just rely more on designing the shapes rather than drawing them with any kind of technical accuracy. There's a few you know, there's one technique that I can think of that really helps me render from imagination, and it's called gradation. And basically what that means is tones on the drawing are not completely flat, okay? There's always going to be a slight gradation from light to dark or dark to light. So if you have a look at this guy's shield here, have a look at this tone, right? It's a little bit lighter up here, where it's a bit closer to the light source, I guess. And then it gets a little darker here, all right? And you can see that in the rectangular shields, like these shields have a slight curvature. So it's a little darker here, where it's turning away from the light source. It's also a little darker in the bottom area. And then you can see I've kind of drawn them very lightly. So there's this gradation of tone that's traveling from light to dark. And I do that with everything. You can see I'm doing it with his arm here. I haven't actually finished drawing the anatomy in that. But you see where it's a little darker at the elbow. Gets a bit lighter in the middle. And then it gets like a little darker there on the hand. You can also see it in his arm. So on this part of the arm, it's a little brighter. And then it gets a little darker there. And that's just a very useful compositional tool that I use. You can see it again in the Centurion. Have a look. I mean, I haven't finished drawing him, but you can see where the light is a bit lighter here, where his shoulder is, where his shoulder and chest is. It kind of rounds, as the form rounds away, it gets a bit darker. And it also gets a little darker. It's a bit tricky to see because of all this decoration that's in the way. But it's a bit darker towards the bottom of his torso. So I'm always thinking in terms of gradations. And that helps me a lot for when I'm rendering. So I'm really hoping that makes sense. And you can do that fairly quickly. In fact, let me show you. So coming back to the Centurion, he's got these decorative elements on his torso. And these are reflective. But what I like to do, so these sort of medallions, let's call them. I forgot the word. I actually did a whole bunch of research on Roman armor. And I've already forgotten the names of everything, but I'm sure somebody in the comments will let us know what they're called. But these kind of medallions, what I'll do, I'll keep them bright up there, and these ones down here will be slightly darker. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to I'm going to go on the angle here. I'm actually just going to hatch through the entire form. And then I'll do another layer. And again, just hatching through the entire form. I'm not going like really detailed or anything. I'm literally just very gently going over the entire surface of his torso. And I'm putting in that gradation from darker in this corner to brighter in this corner there. So I hope you understand that. But, for me personally, everything should have a gradation because it helps you stay in a bit more control of your tones. It's easier to separate the tones a little more when you do that. You could do it with this round shield in the background, right? So I've kind of already done it, but I'll do it again. So I'm going to start in the bottom corner here, crossing over all of those details, and it'll just kind of get a bit lighter in the top corner. Then I'll come back into the bottom corner and the bottom of the shield there. So I hope this technique makes sense. And you can see how there's like a bit of a slightly dark bend on this side, and then it gets lighter on that side. And I do that with everything. So that's been it's been a very useful technique for me personally. So maybe you would like to incorporate that in your own work. Do the same here. So a little darker on this side, going lighter on this side. And my hatching strokes are extremely light. But you can see how those gradations, they really help shape the form, I guess. So I've kind of got that part turning. And I can use a heavier line if I really want to boost that gradation in certain areas. I don't want to go overboard, but yeah, that might work. And yeah, that's how you can get that appearance of form sort of turning and falling away from the light. It's just a very useful technique. I've got a shield here that I can do it to. So I'm going to tone the bottom of it. And then it will get a little bit brighter as it climbs up to the light source. And I'm just treating the shield as if it's just one object, okay? So when I'm hatching it, I'm going through all of its details. I'm not treating them as separate elements. I am being careful though, not to chip into this guy's arm, because that is a separate element. It's got its own form, so it's separate from the shield. But the shield itself, I'm just kind of treating it all as one element. Just treating it as one shape. And I'm not thinking too hard about its three-dimensional volume. When I'm rendering it, I'm really keeping it very simple. Could do the same thing with this guy's toga or skirt or whatever you want to call it. Again, I've forgotten all the names. I researched Roman armor months ago, sometime last year. Bit lighter on this side, bit darker on this side. That gradation is really going to help sell that. It's going to make it look 3D a bit more. And it also helps separate the tones from each other. So very useful technique, or at least in my opinion. I've also got this guy's shield here. Now, I don't know how much you guys know anything about aerial perspective, but here's a simple way to think of it. Shadows will get lighter in the distance. So they're dark in the foreground and they get lighter in the background. Anything in light, such as halftones and things like that, or highlights, they'll be brighter in the foreground. So if you have a look at the highlight in this guy's helmet, brighter in the foreground, and then they get a bit darker in the background. So you've got basically maximum contrast in the foreground, less contrast in the background. So what I'll do when I'm shading this guy's shield, I'll kind of compare it to these guys who have the same shield here. This guy's got a very bright highlight on his shield in this area. Gets a little darker down here because of that gradation. So I'm going to use that as a reference point, and I'm going to just shade this shield in, just hatch it in as if it's a completely flat object. And that's going to be as bright as that shield is going to go. And then as I shade that gradation in, it's going to be much darker towards the bottom of the shield as it travels further from the light source. But that's kind of how I think of objects in the distance, you know, like if I'm trying to figure out what the tone is going to be, I'll just compare it to something else that's in the foreground, something similar. So I'm gonna shut up now and I'm just gonna draw. And I'm gonna make sure my laptop stays on because that video is still uploading. It's only at 75% now. Bloody hell, that's taking forever. Okay. So hopefully you can kind of, I don't know if the camera picks up on those tones. But the highlight on his shield, if we assume that they're the same color and the same tone, because he's further away in the distance, his highlight on his shield is going to be a little darker than this one. So maybe that makes sense. I'm not sure. The Centurion's helmet is kind of blending in with that tone, so I might darken his portion of the helmet, just kind of sketch that in. I suppose so far watching this video, you've noticed how I like to jump around all over the drawing. And yeah, that's how I work now. I don't really focus on specific details too much. Sometimes I can spend hours on them, but I try to avoid that because I want to be looking at the image as a whole. So very early on in the drawing, when I'm sketching all of this up, I'm working here and then I'm coming here and, some figures in the background there. And I do the exact same thing in my rendering process. I've jumped over here, back to here. I spent a little bit too much time with these guys in the foreground, and I mean, I think they look good, but they probably would have looked a bit better if I, pulled back a little bit and focused on these guys, because then I would have had more context to work with. Because while I like how these guys turned out, they're a bit hyper detailed, I find. And yeah, I don't know how I feel about them. They're okay. I think they're good. I think there's a bit too much detail in the foreground, but it's all right. This is only a conceptual thing anyway, so I'm not too bothered about perfection. I'll get it right next time. But, generally, like I was saying, I do like to sort of jump around all over the place, and I try to do that from start to finish. It just gives me much more control over the entire composition. And it keeps the drawing fresh. If you're focusing too much on the details and getting into those nitty-gritty bits, it can get very boring and very tedious and really exhausting. And I think the way you counteract that is to, if you're spending too much time here, focus your attention anywhere else, just anywhere else. And because there's a lot of things to draw in this. If I get bored of drawing this guy, then I can draw this guy. And if I get bored of drawing him, maybe I can draw this guy. If I get bored of drawing people in general, I can draw animals because there's a horse for me to draw. And if I get bored of drawing the horse, I can draw this flag in the foreground. And if I get bored of drawing the flag, then I can draw the clouds. The best thing about these large compositions is that, yes, they are overwhelming and it's very difficult to stay in control of the drawing. But there's so much to draw that you can't ever possibly get bored of it. There's always a different subject for you to focus on. So when I approach this kind of drawing, I just think, what do I feel like drawing today? So I'm going to darken the shadow of this shield that's falling over this guy. And that shadow is also going to have a gradation. I'm going to make it darker at the top and lighter as it travels down to the bottom. And the reason I'm doing that is because I think that looks cool. That's it. There's no technical reason behind it. Rendering, I can teach you about the science of rendering and light and shadow. Scott Robertson also has a book called How to Render, which is a great source. Another book you can look at is Architectural Rendering in Ink Wash by Harold McGonigal, I believe that's the title. That also teaches you a little bit about rendering. But again, when it comes to large compositions, you want to break the rules a little bit, because the most important thing that you can do is to make the drawing readable. So my idea, right, is to make the gradation of the shield from darker at the bottom to lighter at the top. And then its shadow is going to have the exact opposite, right? It's going to be darker at the top and lighter as it travels down. So by doing that, I'm creating a little bit of contrast between those things. And as a result, the forms are more easy to read. So to do a successful drawing, you have to kind of break the rules a little bit. You don't want to be a slave to the laws of reality. You have to understand them. You have to know them. But when you're working on a finished artwork, you have to look for opportunities like that where you can break the rules a little bit and do something a little different. I don't really think we are breaking any rules though with that. I think because if you think about it, the top of the shield would be a bit closer to his shoulder, I think. So the shadow would get darker in that part, because that would be the occlusion shadow, right? The shield would also be very close to his leg. So I'm just kind of imagining there'd be a bit of a gap between his torso here and the shield there. So I don't think we're breaking any fundamental rules. But even if we are, I don't care. I'm going to shade it like that because I think it looks better like that. Let's draw the shadow of his head falling across his torso. I'm just going to kind of go in with a diagonal line. And again, I'm just making it up. I'm not actually calculating where that shadow goes. I'm just making very educated guesses. In my architecture course, when it finally releases, whenever that's going to be, it's massive, by the way, so it's going to take me a while. But I actually do teach you skiography and like how to cast shadows on forms in like elevation drawings. So think about, those classical architecture drawings. But when it comes to casting shadows on figures, it's a bit too complex because you have multiple factors. You've got human anatomy, which has all kinds of twists and lumps and bumps. And then you've got clothing and drapery and, all of like the folds and drapery. Like you just couldn't possibly calculate where the shadows are going to fall, okay? On a cylindrical item like this pole, yeah, that's possible. Anything that has a clean structure like a circle or a square or a cube, a hexagonal prism, yeah, you can cast their shadows very accurately. But human figures and drapery, no, too complex. You're better off learning the rules of shadow casting and then kind of breaking the rules a little bit to design the shadows how you want them to sit on your figures. So I'm not completely disregarding the rules. I'm just kind of taking what I know and then using that to design these shadows. So I think we'd get a sliver of shadow on his shoulder plate from his helmet there. I think that, you know, and again, I'm drawing that because I think that looks cool. I don't know if that's realistic, but... And then I think shadow of his head would continue falling under that shoulder plate there. So we'd get a shape kind of like that. And I'm just trying to assess that to see if it works. It's not too bad. I think that needs to be a little darker. Just going to darken this part of the surface of his helmet. Don't really know if that works, but maybe I'll just lighten that up just a little bit. I don't want to go too dark on that shadow because they're meant to be sort of fading out. I don't want too much contrast in the foreground. What else could we do? This guy in the distance. I'm meant to actually draw a few more figures in the background here. I like how I've rendered his helmet here. It's nice and basic, pretty simple, but we can still tell what's going on, so that's good. Should probably do the same thing with his armor. So I'm going to kind of shade that part in, and he's got like a bit of a highlight from the sunlight reflecting off his armor there. I'm just going to hatch that in gently. It's just very careful hatching strokes. I'm not overcommitting by making anything too dark or whatever. I need a sliver of shadow on his helmet there, I think, just to define that. Maybe there too. Because I kind of want to, I don't know. I kind of want the sunlight reflecting off that panel of the helmet. So I'm going to just chip into that with my eraser. That might be okay. I think that looks all right. I'll just darken the bottom of the helmet at the background there. I think that's pretty readable. You guys probably can't really see that part actually. I think on the camera that's a bit too small. Maybe I'll bring the camera in a bit more so you can see. Gives you a better idea of the details, and I'll just zoom in and I'll just angle it that way. That's kind of what we're working on. So I'm going to take that technique from here, do the same thing over here. So I'm just going to make the shadow of this shield that's falling over him. Just going to make that darker at the top, gets a bit lighter at the bottom. And his shield also has a gradation where you can see it's darker at the bottom here, and then it gradually gets lighter at the top. Just going to hatch over that. That's looking pretty cool. Now, I need to kind of, well, you can see on the shields here, there's this sort of scratched reflective surface. I want to draw that on his shield in the distance, but I can't have it as detailed as that, otherwise it ruins the whole perspective. So what I'll do, I'll just quickly darken it, because there's this dark sort of mid-tone in the center. This one might be a better example. You can see where the tone of the ground is kind of reflecting off the bottom there. And there's a highlight here, which might just clean that up a little bit. And that one there. Definitely that one there. There we go. It's kind of like the sunlight reflecting off those. So I want to get that general effect, but just a more basic version of it here. So I'm just going to kind of go in lightly. I'm just going to shade around that circular form, since that will be reflecting different areas. I know this isn't the most informal art lesson, because I am kind of just figuring this out as I go as well. But I also find that you learn so much just by watching. And that's how I kind of learned from people who taught me to draw and paint. I was not very good at comprehending what it was that they were saying to me. I kind of just watched them draw. And just watching them helped me more. So I'm kind of hoping this video will be similar for you, where you can just watch me work and you get an idea of what it is I'm doing and why I'm doing it. Let's talk about using references. Trying to think, how do I study from reference? Well, that's the word. I study references, I don't copy them. So for example, when I was drawing these Roman legionnaires, I had to dig up some references to research their armor and the weapons they carried, the armor that they wore, the functions of those things as well. And it was quite an interesting history lesson, because the Roman Empire lasted for a few centuries and the armor transformed with it. So this is kind of like very late period Roman armor. So I had to kind of research exactly what period it was that I was kind of drawing. And then when I was researching from the references, I didn't copy them. Like I would kind of research the general proportions of the armor, and then I would draw it from different angles. And then I kind of got good enough at that where I could just draw it from my head. So you have to collect references because, you know, you can't draw something if you don't know what it looks like, right? That's common sense. Like if you're going to draw a car, for example, it helps to know what a car looks like. You know, it has 4 wheels, it's got an engine, it's got doors on the sides, a windshield. So you have to study from reference to know what things look like, obviously. But that doesn't mean you should copy reference. You have to draw it from different angles using your own imagination. And the way you do that is by getting good at perspective drawing. So perspective is king. I don't care what kind of artist you want to be, whether it's an animal artist or a portrait artist or an industrial designer or even an abstract artist. I think every artist should learn perspective because you really owe it to yourself to get good at that. It will free you up. It teaches you how to think three-dimensionally. And you know what? While you're learning perspective, go ahead and read some books on technical drawing or isometric drawing, descriptive geometry. It's not a fun subject to learn, but again, it's going to improve your art. So I was pretty good at perspective drawing and technical drawing because I researched those subjects and I practiced them. And then that helped me to draw everything else. So that when it came to drawing, you know, helmets and shields and things like that, I was just able to draw it from any angle. And in this case, I learned how to draw it from imagination so that I could draw all of these figures. Yeah, that's going to be pretty tricky to draw. I put in a few basic scratches like that in the shield. I think I want to also brighten that up a bit. Or do I? I don't know. Maybe it would look better if I darken that a little bit. I'm not sure. This is where I'm kind of just going in now. It's a bit of a free-for-all. But, you know, again, here's another bit of advice. If you're going to work on like a large composition like this, just sketch lightly to begin with, because you can always refine your tones later. Don't go too dark too quickly, because, hang on, let me just get this bit. Fuck, that is such an awkward angle. I might need to, I don't mind that. I don't know, I'll probably change that later. But draw lightly, because when you draw too dark, that's kind of it, you know, and then it has to stay there. Whereas if you just draw lightly and build up those tones gradually, you're giving yourself an opportunity to make changes later on. Because, you know, right now you might be rendering and you're not quite sure exactly what something should look like, but then another day you might come back to it and you might have a eureka moment, which happens a lot with me. And, you know, you're looking at your drawing and you're assessing it, and then you go, oh, I should change that. And if you sketch lightly, then yeah, you will be able to change it. But if you go too dark, too quick, then you won't be able to change it. So, yeah. Anyway, I'm going to keep chipping away at this. And I figured I would just record this video so you guys could see where it's at. It's getting there. I think I'm going to need some references now, because I need to come back and do the clouds, which I'll probably use a reference for that. Going to need some references for the landscape in the background too, because I don't quite know. I kind of got a general idea of what I want, but it's a pretty vague idea. So, you know, I'm not against using references. I mean, you need to use them in order to learn. But I don't like using them too much, because if I use references too much, I find it influences the drawing too much. So I only pull them out when I get a bit stuck on what to do. But when it comes to light and shadow in this thing, references can't help me at all. That's just something I'm going to have to design on my own. Anyway, I'll keep chipping away at this bad boy. It's getting there. If I could spend every day on it, it'd probably be done by now. But alas, that is not the case.